back to the Faith and Focus podcast. I'm Laura, and in today's episode we're looking at how Christian thought and practice has responded to changing views about gender and family roles in modern society. So we're going to look at traditional and modern Christian teaching on gender roles, Christian responses to secular gender equality, the influence of biblical texts and papal documents, and changing attitudes to parenthood and family structures. There are some specific documents we're going to look at. So we're going to look at Ephesians, Mulieris Dignitatem, we're going to look at Artong, Alistair McGrath, and N. Messer. So let's get to it. Segment 1 then, why do you need to know this? So this looks at a very contested area of Christian ethics. So OCR expects you to understand how Christian roles for men and women have evolved, assess how Christians respond to feminist and secular perspectives, engage with biblical texts and official church teaching, and evaluate how changing views affect family, motherhood and parenthood. So it links to theology, it links to ethics, and it links to religious pluralism, which you looked at previously. Segment 2, Christian teaching on gender roles. So traditional Christian teaching has supported something called complementarian roles. So women are nurturers and caregivers, men are leaders and providers. So separate roles but complementary of each other. So Ephesians chapter 5 verse 21 to 33 begins with, quote, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, end quote. However, verses 22 to 24, they focus on wives submitting to husbands, which critics can say, well, that's patriarchal, blah, 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 blah. But the passage also then goes on to say that husbands have to love their wives as Christ loved the church with a capital C, not the building. And that is a model of sacrificial leadership, not domination. So basically, Christ led the church, but he sacrificed himself for it. It encourages men to do the same, so they sacrifice themselves for the family and the greater good of the family. So Alistair McGrath notes that Paul's command in Ephesians is rooted in mutual submission and challenging simplistic hierarchical readings. So it's not just as simple as men have to be dominated, men dominate women and women are subjective to men. It's not as simple as that, and that's what Alistair McGrath argues. So, egalitarian approaches. Many modern Christians argue that spiritual gifts and leadership roles should be open to all, regardless of gender. So when in Genesis it says male and female he created them, that affirms equal dignity and vocation. So there is no reason why men and women can't do the same roles within the church. Segment 3, so Christian responses to secular gender equality. So in our contemporary society now, we are very much into gender equality in all aspects, especially in employment and leadership. We think about flexible parenting and caregiving roles. It's not always the woman that stays at home. We have diverse family structures. So we have blended families and reconstituted families and extended families. It's not just man, woman, 2 children. So conservative responses to that would say that traditional roles are divinely ordained. So they are written in the Bible in terms of Adam and Eve have different roles, and that's what they do. They think about feminism as a potentially destabilising force. It's not that it's a bad thing, it's destabilising. So there's a very stable idea of man, woman, children, and feminism can disrupt that and then makes other problems. And often they resist changes in church leadership and liturgy, so they don't want women to be priests, for example. Progressive responses would argue that gender equality is a gospel imperative. So they look at Jesus' treatment of women, and Jesus treats women as disciples. He heals women. He speaks to women that are traditionally cast out of society like prostitutes. Okay? And it's women that he appears to after the resurrection, not men. So Elaine Storkey and Lisa Sowell Cahill argue that Christianity has to confront structural gender injustice in its own theology. So we've got to look at the inherent patriarchal nature of Christianity and what we are saying is Christian teaching. Nancy Messer stresses the need for Christian ethics to account for social change without abandoning theological depth. So we have to look at the fact that things are different in society, but still keep that link to theology and Christian teaching. And Rosemary Tong, she outlines liberal, radical and cultural feminism, all of which critique religious tradition that relegate women to the private sphere. So if women are not out there in public doing roles like vicar or priest or leadership roles or in general or whatever, then you are basically saying that all women are good for is being in the home. And she critiques that idea and says, right, liberal feminism, radical feminism, cultural feminism all say that that's not appropriate anymore. Right, so segment 4, we're looking at Catholic views, particularly from Mulieris Dignitatem, which is Pope John Paul II. So he looked at the unique dignity that women have. So in section 18 of that document, quote, "The Church gives thanks for each and every woman," end quote. Section 19 says, quote, "Woman is entrusted with the human being in a special way," end quote. So basically, women can get pregnant and have babies, and that's a special thing that we are entrusted with that men don't have. So in Mulieris Dignitatem, he upholds motherhood as a key female vocation and offers Mary, Jesus' mother, as the model of womanhood. So in the Catholic Church, Mary is often presented as the ideal woman. She's the ideal mother, she's the ideal woman in general, she's without sin, blah, blah, blah. So she is offered up as this ideal that women should try and aim to become. So while affirming women's spiritual equality, that document does commit to distinct roles based on biological and theological difference. Now, bearing in mind that Pope John Paul II is 90s up to noughties, early noughties, I think, if I remember rightly. So it's still quite away from where we are today. We might have done another 20 or 30 years of like societal change, so that can still be seen, I think, as quite a traditional way of looking at things. So supporters of that would affirm that women's dignity is specific and it's within a theological framework and it's a designated role. We can do that and men can't. Critics would say that it's reinforcing those traditional expectations and it's limiting the agency of women in ministry. So they are not able to participate. As a Catholic woman, you cannot become a priest. Okay, so you cannot do that mission and evangelism that God wanted everyone to do. McGrath, again, says that feminist theology has deeply challenged traditional doctrine on God, gender and the church. So that might be worth using in your answer. Segment 5, changing attitudes to parenthood and family. So traditional Christian models favour the nuclear family. So if you do sociology, you will be familiar with what a nuclear family is. That's traditionally a man and a woman married with children. Distinct parental roles. Women do the child rearing and the caring. Men do the going out to work and the providing. But society today is increasingly pluralistic, so there are different types of families. There are same-sex parents, single parents and blended families from people that have been divorced and then got married again. There are shared financial and parenting responsibilities. It's not necessarily always the woman that stays at home with the children. And we have a redefinition of marriage and family roles. How do Christians respond to that? Well, some churches will bless a same-sex union. There are others that provide inclusive family support and affirm parenthood beyond gender norms, i.e. will accept gay parents. But there are others that resist all of that. So, for example, the Catholic Church doesn't accept gay marriage and it doesn't accept same-sex parents either. Tong and Cahill argue that Christianity must redefine family in light of justice, compassion and real-world needs. So brief overview, evaluation, etc. So traditional views, they can offer continuity and clarity. It's very easy to know where you stand in a traditional view, whether you like it or you don't. And it is grounded in scripture and a long-standing theological tradition. So it goes way back right to Jesus, a lot of it. However, it can marginalise women. It does give a very specific and some might say limited role for women. There are lots more opportunities for men within Christianity, traditional Christianity anyway. Progressive views, it does respond to the lived reality of most modern Christians, so it's adaptive, and it emphasises the justice, dignity and relational equality. So how are we relating to each other, and we need to treat each other with dignity and respect. But does it take away theology from its roots? If its roots are saying men and women have specific roles, then saying that they don't is kind of flying in the face of that. So it's, up there for debate. Messer insists that a Christian ethic must balance biblical fidelity and contextual relevance. So you've got to marry the two up somehow, which is obviously the key point and the key problem for most people. Okay, so thanks for joining me in this deep dive into gender and society. So in the next episode, we're going to look at gender and theology. So looking at feminist theology's challenge to language about God, the role of women in salvation history, and critiquing male-dominated religious authority. So until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and keep learning. Bye!